Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Unlimited. Today, we are talking about what's killing my motivation, and of course, the follow-up question to that, which is, how do I fix it? This is something that a lot of clients come to me with because they're feeling stuck. That's usually when they've reached out. They're saying, I feel stuck. I'm not sure what to do. I want this thing, but I don't know how to get it. I don't know what I need to do. I thought I knew what I needed to do, but yet I'm still not doing the things. Sometimes there are stories around laziness, which we talked about in the last episode around productivity and the issues around laziness. And honestly, even when I was doing research for this episode, I came across a Healthline article that said how to overcome laziness or how to stop being lazy. And I was like, oh God, y'all. We need to stop it with this because here's the thing. Any of these shaming tactics, and maybe they don't come off as shaming, maybe they come off as warm and fuzzy and like helpful and supportive initially, where they're like, oh, you just need to think about it differently and it'll be better, are often ignoring the real dynamics in our social structure. Because the thing is, our society is based on this uber individualistic structure that's rooted in patriarchy and white supremacy and essentially this idea of domination. I'm going to get into that a little bit more later, but that structure will kill your motivation. So I would like to put forward this idea that perhaps the reason that you feel stuck isn't due to some internal deficiency or internal problem in the way that you perceive the world, but actually more of a subconscious rebellion against toxic societal norms. And so trying to then impose more of that on yourself isn't actually gonna work terribly well for any kind of sustained motivation. So we're gonna look at this. We're gonna look at like, what are all of these stories that we tell ourselves that actually are killing motivation? And, you know, a lot of the reasons that people say that they think they're having a problem is, you know, they don't know the right thing to do. They must have a mindset issue. They need to get more organized, more disciplined, manage their time better. You notice some of these themes of like just that control, that need to manage yourself. And again, maybe some truth to that. But they're surface issues. There's a reason that those exist. And so often we just tackle these surface issues and like just try and give new strategies and new tactics and tips and like just do this and use this planner and do this thing. And the reason that you're struggling is deeper than that. So that's what we're going to look at in this episode. We're going to look at those deeper issues that may be killing your motivation. And we're going to talk about some solutions to re-energize taking action. And yes, there are some structural dynamics that we're dealing with. So with acknowledgement of that and acknowledgement of the structures that we live in, there's still things that you can do. So it is possible, as I've asserted many times on this podcast, it is possible to recognize that we're functioning in certain structures and engage those structures to create change as an individual, recognizing that part of the structural issue is that we're too individualistic. Okay. Anyway, so some of the things that we're talking about in this episode are beliefs about motivation that sabotage you, understanding what motivation actually is, which can help you engage differently so you get out of stuck. What's wrong with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? If you're not familiar with it, it is one of the core things that we tend to point to and go, okay, this is what's going on with motivation. So it's often used in motivational talks. We're going to talk about that. Patterns of confidence and self-doubt in compassionate people, because those play together. Lots of fun. And check-ins to increase your motivation to do the things you say you want to do. Lots to cover here. Very exciting. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Valerie Friedlander, Certified Life Business Alignment Coach, and this is Unlimited. This podcast bridges the individual and the societal, scientific and spiritual, positive and negative, nerdy and no, there's just a lot of nerdy. Come on board and let's unlock a life that's as badass as you are. I'd like to start off with the acknowledgement that my industry, the life coaching industry, which is an unregulated industry, and I do talk about that in one of my very first episodes about what is life coaching, but also the psychological field in general. So psychology, therapy, self-help, personal development, leadership, like all of that stuff has historically been rooted in white supremacy and patriarchal norms. So I've been personally doing a lot of work because, well, I have a long history of doing personal development work, both in study and in practice, and I have certifications and all of that sort of stuff. There's a lot of unlearning to be done, even with the benefits of all of those things. And I might even say, especially with all of that. Now, not all of my study and background have been in Eurocentric models. However, it's impossible not to internalize the dynamics of a society that you live in. I've talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to go into details with all of that, but I want to acknowledge that because as I was digging into this, I mean, a lot of my industry's way of supporting people and achieving their goals is about helping people function optimally within a toxic structure. So I laugh because it's like, a lot of this is about unpacking how we do things and being able to do things differently and recognizing that we only have so much control. So what do we have control over and how do we function optimally within what we can control while also not optimizing to the point of ignoring toxic structures? Hopefully all that makes sense, but it's something that came up a lot as I was digging into researching around this episode. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but that's always my core focus, both in what I share on this podcast, but also the work that I do, meeting people where they're at, and then engaging some of these things that are internalized that may be contributing. So like I said in the beginning of this episode, that perhaps some of the reason the stuck is there, it's not just about overcoming your own personal stuff. It's about acknowledging that the personal stuff may be coming up because of some of the structures. And rather than trying to handle them better, how do we shift them as individuals and as part of a society? So, as I've mentioned, as you know, probably from listening to this, I am a bit of a word nerd. So I dug into, first and foremost, what is motivation? Because people think of it when we're talking about it, when they come to me, people are thinking about it usually as like a feeling. I want to feel motivated to do stuff. And maybe if I felt more motivated, I would do stuff or that sort of thing. And so there's this sense that it's an energy, an excitement, a readiness, and oftentimes like a purposefulness, a certainty. That's tied to clarity, which is one of the things that can block motivation, is where there's lack of clarity. However, certainty is also an issue because that hesitation, anytime you're like trying to figure stuff out or you want to do something, maybe you're excited about it, but then you hesitate. Biologically speaking, that hesitation sends a signal to the brain that there could be danger. It's like you automatically paused and your brain goes, oh, that means there's a caution sign, which, hey, maybe there is a caution sign. But then it feeds into, that means there's potential danger, so we should go away from that. Versus, that means there's potential danger. Let's take a look around and check out what's going on so that we can then take appropriate action and keep moving forward. while being aware that there's potential danger. Oftentimes that shift of, oh, there's danger here means that we create a block to taking action. So that's, the personal internal thing that can kill motivation. And then we create a cycle of that of like, well, I can't do that, or I get disappointed when I engage that. So then I don't take action. So going into the definition, motivation is the act or process of giving someone a reason for doing something. It's the condition of being eager to act, so that excitement, having a motive, purposefulness, which would be like a need or desire to act. And so ultimately, all of this relates to acting. So if you think about the word motivation, motivate would be, relating to motion or causing movement. So what motivates you is what causes movement. So within that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a feeling. It's something that causes movement. Now, feelings have a large impact on our actions. So naturally, a feeling, a desire to move forward, an excitement and energy, a purposefulness is going to help you take action, but it is not required. And when we have that pause, that hesitation, that then feeds into, oh, there could be something going on here. Then we have the cycle of self-doubt kick in and we stop. We'll dig into that a little bit more in just a bit, but there are two core types of motivation that people think about. There's extrinsic, so inspired by outside forces, other people pushing or motivating you, and rewards. So you did a good job, you get a reward. So I want the reward, so I'm going to take the action. And intrinsic, inspiration that comes from within. So a love of doing, a connectedness to your identity and who you believe that you are. Intrinsic motivation tends to be stronger and more fulfilling. And the other thing that I noticed is that intrinsic tends to be rooted in a process, a feeling related to the action that one is taking versus simply a outcome that one is hoping for. So that's something to note when you're thinking about what motivates you. And this is something that I talk about as when I talk about visioning, it's gaining clarity, not just on what you want in the future, but what you want in the present. Who do you want to be? What connects to you? Because when your actions connect to the person that you want to be and how you want to experience life, when you have that alignment, hence I use the word alignment a lot, it makes it easier to take action. There is a ease in feeling motivated, even when there is self-doubt, even when there is that hesitation, because if the movement itself is aligned, there's going to be more energy in taking the action versus if it's this external attachment to outcome. And if you've had incidents where you were attached to outcome and it didn't work out the way you expected and you were disappointed, that can then feed into a fear or the potential danger that hesitation triggers. And then your brain likes patterns. It likes to connect dots. It goes, oh, this reminds me of that time that we did the thing and we were really disappointed. And then you beat yourself up about it. And that felt really bad. And all of this is very painful and we don't want to do it. And all of that is happening in your subconscious, which is naturally going to kill your motivation. So when it's that outcome, it's a potential future thing that might not go the way you anticipated versus a connection to the action that, hey, maybe it doesn't go exactly the way I'm hoping it will, but I felt good about what I did. You'll have that different sense of motivation. So I think that's where the extrinsic and intrinsic motivations differ. And the reason why the intrinsic is stronger and more fulfilling, it's not just about what other people say, it's about your own experience of life. So as I was doing research on this and kind of exploring, okay, well, what do other people say is motivating? I came across a Psychology Today article that talked about, the basics around motivation. And it talked about extrinsic and intrinsic and stuff. And then it referenced Abraham Maslow, who wrote The Theory of Human Motivation. So naturally, that was referenced. And the hierarchy of needs, which basically said, and this is from 1943, it basically said, we are inherently motivated to better ourselves and move progressively forward from fundamental needs such as food and safety. So we have a motivation for food and safety, those basic needs, that survival needs, to self-actualization. And eventually, he went into, this idea of self-transcendence, so moving beyond the self. So there's an issue with this. If you listened to my episode on toxic positivity, you will probably recognize some of what I'm going to say, which is that idea that our needs are a pyramid and that self-transcendence is like the ideal. It's the top of the pyramid. That's where we're trying to get to because that is the preferred way of being, which means that all those basic needs are, they're basic. So they're not as important. We want to transcend the self. Is there a benefit to being able to see beyond yourself and think in the big picture and be in that spiritually focused place? Yeah, sure. But it's not at the exclusion of the self and the experience of being human. I've said this a lot of times. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. We need to honor the human experience part of this versus putting the spiritual on a pedestal. So in reading this in this article, I was reminded of something that I'd seen on Instagram. And as much as social media has got its issues and there's plenty of stuff that can lead you down rabbit holes and kill your motivation and all of that, I have really appreciated some of the learning that I've had the opportunity to do by following people on Instagram. And a while back, I remembered seeing something pop up, and unfortunately, I don't remember who posted it. It was a while back, but there was a conversation going on around Maslow's hierarchy having been appropriated from a native tribe. And so I Googled that. I was like, okay, well, I remember there's a thing here, and I feel like there's stuff. So let's look at that. And I found an article on Buffalo's Fire, which is an independent digital news site created by Jody Rave Spotted Bear, who is the founder and director of the Indigenous Media Freedom Alliance. In this article, it talks about the Blackfoot origins of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, it addresses some of the discussions of appropriation and misrepresentation and that sort of thing. But what the author focuses in on is where Maslow got this idea in the first place and the experience that he had living with the Blackfoot tribe to develop this idea. And of course, unsurprisingly, Maslow came into living with this tribe with the theory that social hierarchies are maintained by dominance, but found a society that had cooperation, minimal inequality, restorative justice, and high satisfaction. And so this influenced this idea that self-actualization, or the desire to become everything that one is capable of becoming, is really what we want. From seeing this community that had much greater life satisfaction than the community that he came from. It's a great article, and of course I will have a link in the show notes for you to check it out. But what I noticed within this, and this is what motivated me to want to bring this into the conversation, as well as, noticing how we've structured things, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs is focused on the individual and this idea of achievement of self-actualization, this idea that becoming everything that one is capable of becoming is something that you earn, that you work for, that, again, in that pyramid structure. Whereas the Blackfoot tribe and many other tribes are rooted in the idea that we arrive self-actualized. that self-actualization is innate. And the next piece of that is community actualization. So in this structure, wealth was not measured by money, but by generosity. The wealthiest of the tribe had almost nothing to do with money because they had given it all away. Because what you did was as you accumulated things, then you all come together and distribute it according to need. So it's not the whole idea of poverty and basic needs as something that need to be met first, and then we kind of move up the ladder to the self-actualization wasn't a thing. So like I talked about in the episode about internalized beauty standards, it just emphasized to me this need to unlearn these structures, these hierarchical structures. It's so ironic to me. I mean, appropriate, but like that it's a hierarchy of needs. And that's supposedly what motivates us. But then again, recognizing and looking at that structure makes sense when you are in a hierarchical society, a society with that ladder mentality and that hierarchical structure versus a communal structure where basic needs, ensuring safety, creating the conditions for the expression of purpose is a community responsibility versus an individual responsibility. So Dr. Cindy Blackstock is the one who put together a pyramid structure to kind of compare with. So we have that Western perspective of the hierarchy of needs being, the physiological needs, safety needs, belongingness and love needs, esteem needs, need to know and understand, aesthetic needs, self-actualization, and then self-transcendence. That's the pyramid of Maslow. The First Nations perspective would be more self-actualization is at the foundation, then community actualization, then cultural perpetuity. So like carrying the culture forward. But really, it's more of a concentric circle model that honors us as a whole beings that engage the cognitive, physical, emotional, and spiritual needs, which is where that idea of being a holistic person and honoring a holistic being is rooted. So thinking about okay, well, what motivates me? As I mentioned in the last episode on productivity, it's about honoring those different areas of your life and the things that drain you so that you can support yourself. Would it be nice if we lived in a more communally supportive society? Yes. Is that something that I hope that we are all striving for and that it's part of the way we engage? Yes, absolutely. It's certainly something that I'm thinking a lot more about and considering how that fits within my own structures. And it also has me questioning some of the things that I've created before. So in the episode, Self-Control is Not Always the Answer, I created a pyramid of support, which is about, self-support and how we, prioritization, which as we still live in this hierarchical individualistic society does make sense. At the same time, I think it's really important to have an awareness of the reason it looks that way. So taking that understanding and taking a look then at what have clients said? Because I give a questionnaire when we first start working together. And one of the things I ask is, what do you believe motivates you? And by far, the most common thing that people said was helping others, being of service, problem solving, learning, making an impact, creativity. And then along those lines, it's acknowledgement for doing the problem solving and helping, recognition. They get excited about a potential outcome, achievement and results, starting something new, and money. Which all of this actually makes a lot of sense because, you've got a mix of the extrinsic and intrinsic, like I mentioned before. And I tend to work with high achieving, compassionate people. So naturally, there's this desire to help other people. But we have this toxic overarching thing in our society where helping other people, there's not the communal component of that is missing. So naturally, we look to that exchange that, okay, I'm putting energy out there, but am I getting it back? And how do I get it back? Well, oftentimes it's through money because that's how our society is structured to function. So one of the other questions I ask is, when do you feel confident? And the answer is helping others, ideas, creativity, problem solving. When I see results and evidence of an impact, people show or express that they found the help valuable and doing stuff I know well. So I was like, oh gosh, this this is fascinating, because if you take a look at those things, those are the things that motivate them, are the things that they also feel confident doing, are the things that help them feel connected to other people. As I mentioned many times, our brains like patterns. So there is a very strong likelihood that the confidence and the motivation, when those actions fit together and they're connected in some way in the way we perceive ourselves and the impact of what we're doing, if we're not feeling confident, then naturally we're not going to feel motivated. And what would kill those things would be that disconnection, the disconnection from the communal sense of the process, helping other people, finding solutions, problem solving, being creative, the things that are them and the way they are in the world, and what feels good to be able to do in connecting with people. And that's when the self-doubt creeps in, because there's that disconnect. Anytime that we're like, oh, I have a purpose, I'm doing the thing, this is what I love to do, but there's a disconnect that happens that hits the confidence. Maybe it's in a result, maybe it's in a previous experience that our brains made a connection to, then we think, oh, well, it kills our motivation. Our confidence gets hit, our motivation gets hit, because those two are related. So the self-doubt messages that people have shared come up. I don't have time. It's too much work. I don't know enough. I don't know how. Someone is already doing it better. My contribution doesn't matter. I won't be able to keep up. I'm going to hurt someone and ruin their life or my own life or my kids or the person I want to help. And that fear of the potential danger, that doubt in your own abilities, that lack of support to be the person that you are, all the stories that we take on, all of the ways that we question ourselves, the imposter syndrome and the society that supports having imposter syndrome. Because if you have imposter syndrome, then you either won't occupy a space that society doesn't want you to, or you'll buy things to help you feel better about occupying that space. When does this come up? When I'm comparing with other people. Disconnection leads to a greater sense of competition versus collaboration, right? You see a lot of that conversation going on. Going from exciting things to mundane tasks. There's a lot more room for your brain to spin and question and play in some of those toxic absorbed stories when you're doing something that's not involving your brain. You have a lot more space to doubt. And then the stories that we tell ourselves around the doubt itself. Like, if I'm doubting, there must be something to doubt. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a habit. I don't know. Might be worth looking at. Getting visible, being visible. You're open to judgment. There's so much judgment in this society. And, if you're judging yourself, gosh, what are other people doing? Probably judging themselves too. But, when I'm by myself, again, the brain spinning. When bills are due, because, hey, triggers, money is a major trigger, because that is where the exchange lies for us to sustain ourselves. Because again, those hierarchy of needs, if you're in a hierarchical society and then the basic needs might not be met, then naturally that's going to pull your attention, those physical needs, and money is a key factor in that. So anything that triggers that danger, when something goes differently than expected. And of course, that's that's where we start telling stories about, oh, that didn't go the way I thought it would. If you have a cycle around beating yourself up when something doesn't go right, or even, telling yourself that it went wrong, because if there's a right, there's a wrong. That will also drain your energy, that self-flagellation over what could I have done differently? Where did I screw up? Did I pick wrong? Maybe I have a bad picker. Maybe I did this and that, whatever. All of those things will naturally drain your motivation because they disconnect your confidence from what you want to do. And that disconnection has stories around it that say that there must be a problem here. And then people also experience it when they gain success because entering a new space can be scary because you don't know what to expect. And it could be, again, pulling into, oh, I might do something wrong. There might be danger here because we don't have that communal safety net where we feel supported. So making a wrong move, quote unquote, wrong move is much more dangerous when you feel like you're alone in the decision making, when it's an individualistic experience, and especially when you're left to be caught up in your own head. So what do we do about this? Well, one of those things is being aware of the toxic stories and the toxic structures. Because when you're aware of it and when it's not a personal deficiency that you beat yourself up over, it's something that you can engage in a conscious way. So we can start to make change that is so critical for humanity to make change. So being aware of that, which is why I include it in this conversation. Another piece is connect to values. When you know what's important to you, you can build processes, you can build strategies, you can build plans that relate to that. So creating that intrinsic motivation where what you do is aligned with your values so that even if it does not go as anticipated, you know that you took action in alignment, and then you can assess what worked, what didn't, and how do you maybe choose a different path while being aligned with the person that you want to be. So connecting to those values. Another is focus on something to create. So what are you trying to create in the world? What are you trying to create in your own life versus avoiding something? I saw this funny, well, I thought it was funny, post that was avoid procrastination. Like, oh my gosh, that's the same energy though. Procrastination is avoidance. So avoid avoidance? Yikes. No, it's not avoid avoidance because then your focus is still on the avoidance. Now, engaging the procrastination and what's underneath the procrastination is different. That's actually, engage the procrastination. So taking a look at that resistance can help you then create a plan that connects to your values and a way of executing that plan, executing the actions, doing the movement, as it were, to navigate whatever the resistance is. So maybe it's a block that is happening in the external world. So it's something to navigate that you're experiencing tangibly. Maybe it's an internal something. Maybe there's a misalignment with the action that you're taking or even the goal that you're striving for. There's a should there. A lot of us have shoulds. We don't even realize our shoulds. We just think that they are that way. So, I should have a purpose. Well, maybe you don't feel purposeful right now because you have been so burnt out by some of the ways that we've been told we're supposed to do things that you are having trouble connecting to a purpose. Okay, so what would it take to give yourself some more space to rest so that you can then gain clarity, right? So there's misalignment there. Fear, the inner critic, making assumptions about things, our brains connecting dots in ways that don't necessarily apply. Maybe they applied in one circumstance, but they don't apply to your current circumstance. So those dots being connected, the fears, all of that self-doubt messaging and believing it instead of going, okay, where is this coming from? What's going on with this? How true is it? What would I want to do with it? How could I test it? So engaging it in a conscious way instead of trying to avoid it, right? The avoidance is going to create more avoidance. So if you're trying to move, avoiding is not going to be the thing. Clarity. This is by and large the thing to look at. And you'll notice that everything that I invite you into is about exploring for clarity. Sometimes it's really just having a clear plan to take action on and assess, to be able to say, okay, I did these things, I wrote this much, and then I'm going to go back and look at the response. I'm going to go back and look how the process worked. So having that clarity can make a big difference in taking action and feeling motivated to do something, because you're like, okay, I have an experiment that I have set forward. It's very clear. I'm going to do the thing. And then we can look at it and go, well, did you do the thing? No. Then we look at resistance. If you did do the thing, then we look at how did that go? How aligned is it? What shifts are we going to make? Or what are we going to continue doing? And then because we are overwhelmed with all of these toxic stories, and this push for productivity, need for rest. You may not feel motivated because you need to rest. Like I mentioned before, sometimes it's really hard to be able to see clearly when you are so deprived of rest and self-connection. Feeling confident, feeling motivated is not going to happen if you're too depleted. And this is where burnout happens. So this is where burnout happens both in our corporations. This is where burnout happens even when you're an entrepreneur. Because again, we exist in this society that is full of these toxic norms, hierarchical structures, individualism, et cetera, that make it so that we are more and more depleted. We don't have the support systems. Everything is much more risky because we don't have community. So need for rest is a big one. If you're like, okay, Val, that's great, but I still want to do something. The biggest thing to remember from all of this is that motivation equals movement. So even if you don't feel motivated, taking some sort of action and then not telling stories to yourself about what it means. What does it all mean? Not telling those stories and actually looking at it clearly, if you're taking some action, that is motivating. Okay, action, movement, motivation. So maybe it's not the movement that you were thinking you wanted to take. Maybe it's a different movement. Maybe you address it like maybe it was an action, a thinking, or create a program, or come up with a marketing, or do a activity with your kid, or whatever it is. Maybe it was that, but maybe the action, the movement that you take is to take a nap or go for a walk or have a good cry. Those are movement too. So remember that you're a holistic being and it's not just about producing something. Movement is motivational. To wrap up, I had a call recently with a woman who contacted me specifically because of motivation and not feeling motivated. And so just going to give you a little inside look at what an exploration call looks like when it comes to this. And so what she said was she broke down her goals into what seemed like a reasonable time frame, but then she didn't follow through. And she keeps doing this. And that's one of the strategies that people say a lot of times is just break them down into actionable, reasonable chunks. And, these are the tools that, the tips and productivity things that are often given. But the problem with this is that if it doesn't fit the underlying reason that things aren't happening, then you're not going to do them. It doesn't matter how great the tip is. So recognizing that and then taking a look at, okay, so when do you get things done? Well, it was usually last minute when she was frustrated with herself or when she was having a particularly energized time where she could just blast through everything. Well, okay, it's interesting because those are similar energies. That frustration, you get that burst of energy to get things done. When you have energy already, you can get things done. It's this burst of energy. So with that, there's a good chance that our brain was making a connection that this energy is what I need to do things. So if that energy wasn't present, create the circumstances that allow for that energy to happen. If it is present, then we can do things. So there's a subconscious equation happening. So one thing we talked about was like making notes on a calendar. When does this energy burst happen when it was not generated by you due to last minute frustration? And see what else might be going on that supports that energy. What is it? Something environmental? Is there some thought or belief or feeling that's happening there? Maybe it's hormonal, but, looking into, is there a common pattern or trigger that can harness this energy? We also determined that her common trigger for procrastination is doing something where she needed to learn or try something new, especially when she was doing it by herself. That's when her inner critic would start telling her that, oh, you're not smart enough to protect you from this potential failure since you don't know what you're doing. So looking at that pattern, okay, here's this something new. You're not smart enough. This fear gets generated. And so naturally, there's an avoidance that happens. So once we identify the pattern, then we can explore, okay, what do we do to shift this pattern? So I invited her to a couple questions to explore when that pattern shows up. If you believed that you were capable, because that thought is you're not smart enough. So if you believed you were capable, and then instead of fear, you felt passionate, what would you do? What would help you feel more passionate or fun doing the thing that you planned to do? So when we notice what that thought pattern is that's creating the death of motivation in doing the thing, then we can explore, well, what would you do differently if those things were different, if that thought and feeling were different? And as I mentioned before, taking movement, taking action. So what action would you take if you believed this? And that's where you get to, it's not just taking contrary action. It's actually going, okay, there's this action here. I'm taking this action and I'm consciously thinking, okay, I can do this. Now let's see what happens. So you're essentially using your brain to go, okay, let's prove something different. Right now, the brain is functioning on a theory that it has of dots that it's connected. So let's try a new theory. Let's do a new experiment and see if the results are different or the same. Because that's essentially what scientists would do. You don't do one experiment and then go, oh, well, that's it. And you also have to recognize that your theory can influence the way you do the experiment in the first place. So if we bring forward a different theory and create some test opportunities, we might be able to prove something different. It's the benefits of flaws of science. And then create a process for checking in and support taking that action. So as I mentioned earlier, going, okay, what worked, what didn't? Did I do the thing? If that didn't work, what about it didn't work? Did it not align with my values? Did it not align with what was actually enjoyable? And what would I like to try in this next experiment? So that's what that exploration call looked like. And then I sent her an email with the outline of what we talked about so that she can go forward. And whether or not we work together in the future, she has this structure to start taking movement, motivating to get things going for herself. And that is always what I'm here to support you doing, meeting yourself where you're at and taking the next step so that you are building the staircase that moves you to where you want to go, the impact that you want to have. And hopefully, even though we are living in an individualistic society where we do take these actions oftentimes much more alone than we would like, to be able to lean into building community and a support network for ourselves. I'm a huge advocate of having a support team and building community, which is why I will often work in tandem with someone who has a therapist or who has a mastermind they're working in or whatever, because we do so much better when we work together. Oh, look, I made a rhyme. So I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear what insights you take away from this episode. And be sure to tune in next week when we are talking about time and time management, which I have an issue with in terminology, as I'll talk about next week, as I'm sure you're not surprised. And If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others and reach out and tell me your takeaways. I'd love to hear from you. If you would like support for yourself and you'd like to grab one of those exploration sessions so that we can dig in and get you moving, then grab that spot on my calendar. There's a link in the show notes, and I will talk to you all next time. Thanks for listening. I so appreciate you being here. If you got something out of today's episode, please share it. Leave me a review, take a screenshot, and post it on social with a shout out to me. Send it to a friend or, all of the above. Want to hang out more? Join me on Instagram. Or better yet, get on my mailing list to make sure you don't miss out on anything. And remember, your possibilities are as unlimited as you are. Allow yourself to shine, my friend. The world needs your light. See you next time.